Chapter 15. I didn't have long to sit and stew over my decision. Shortly after Rath left, a servant came with a dress box and a note from the master of this house. In less than an hour, I'd be dining with the prince of this court in his private quarters. Apparently, Envy did not want an audience for our meeting. Or perhaps he didn't wish to share his latest curiosity, as he'd once said. Nerves buzzed like a swarm of bees trapped in my belly. Envy was ruthless, but I was mostly confident he wouldn't harm me now. Not while I was in this realm, and doing so would potentially start a war between House Wrath and House Envy. Being a member of House Wrath certainly had some political perks. I was no longer simply a witch without a royal demon court to protect me. Envy would need to think long and hard before he stuck any dagger in my back. Logically knowing that didn't ease all of my worry, though. It was hard to push aside the night he'd held my parents hostage and then commandeered our house. I still couldn't believe Nona had banished him back to the underworld using magic I was unaware she possessed. That swirling vortex was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen. I shoved those memories away and focused on the here and now. I recalled what Wrath had said about victors and victims. Tonight I would be victorious. I was here to get information, and I would do everything in my power to succeed. If I had to don the attire of my enemy, so be it. It was an extremely small price to pay. I'd wear his silly dress and bat my lashes, all while counting down the moments until I got what I was truly after. Let's see what dress you've chosen, Prince of Jealousy. I opened the box and rolled my eyes. The gown was gorgeous, a hunter green velvet that was dark enough to almost be mistaken for black, with long fitted sleeves, a snug bodice that plunged open almost to my navel, and flowing skirts. A single emerald, the size of a robin's egg, was fastened onto a sparkling silver chain. The outrageously opulent necklace was likely a pretty weapon Envy wished for me to use against his brother. I could picture Wrath's expression shuddering when he spied the gift that belonged to House Envy glittering on my chest. Apparently, pissing contests were not simply an idiotic mortal pastime. I thought about staying in my current dress, but figured Envy might be more amenable to sharing information if he wasn't scowling at the offensive House Wrath attire. And I also did not wish to sink to their level of ridiculous royal posturing. After I slipped on the gown and rolled up the sleeves to show off my forearms, I dabbed some rouge across my cheekbones and lips. I picked up the necklace. The gemstone was flawless. I would no doubt become the envy of anyone who saw it. I managed to clasp it around my neck when a servant entered my chamber. If you're ready, I'll show you to dinner, Lady Emilia. I'd been hoping for a few moments alone to practice summoning my magic just in case things went very wrong, but even a few hours wouldn't feel like enough time to overcome years of training. I'd missed. I smiled at the servant. Please lead the way. As I moved toward the door, I caught my reflection in an oversized mirror. I looked ready to do battle in the most elegant, vicious way. I truly was turning into a princess of hell. Goddess help the demons. We traveled down the opposite end of the corridor where my suite was located. I Unsurprisingly, Envy had situated me in the wing, better to keep one's enemies close and one's future sister-in-law closer. I wondered if that was one of the reasons for Wrath's foul mood. The brothers clearly enjoyed digging at each other as often as possible, though they would need to find something else to fight over. Magical bond or not, I belonged only to myself. A stoic guard inclined his head, then stepped back and opened the door. An expansive room spread out before me, mostly dressed in darkness. It was meant to unnerve. But there was little for me to fear in the shadows. Soon they would do my bidding. I stepped inside and paused to fully evaluate the room as the door snicked shut behind me. It was not quite a study, nor was it a formal dining room. If we were in the mortal world, it would be similar to a gentleman's club often described in my favorite romance novels. A circular table with two chairs was placed near a wall of windows, offering a bit of soft light to filter in. Tapers and an impressive silver candelabra were lit on the table, and a few sconces in the farthest corners also add hints of warm light. Most of the chamber was cast in shadows, including the door where I stood. I glanced up. The tray ceiling was adorned with a fresco, winged beings on clouds, some bright, others stormy. My gaze traveled around the room and stopped on the shadowy figure of the prince. Envy lounged in an oversized velvet chair near a darkened corner, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. One long leg was kicked up, his ankle resting on a knee. He couldn't look more comfortable or relaxed if he tried, though his grip indicated he was not as at ease as he'd like me to believe. He took a long sip of his drink, his gaze hidden from view, but I felt it travel over me all the same. You certainly know how to stir up trouble, pet. I remained in the shadows. I may have claws, your highness, but I assure you I am no one's pet, least of all yours. Envy leaned forward into a pool of candlelight and somehow, even while seated, managed to look down his regal nose at me. His beautifully harsh features were set into an unimpressed frown. Thank the devils for that. I don't share what's mine. Keeping lovers through force is nothing to boast about. Choice is appealing, force is not. Might does not always make right, unless my bedmate asks nicely. His gaze raked over me, and I wondered how well he could see into the shadows. I take it you've accepted my invitation to play with envious emotions? Don't you enjoy inspiring envy? Coming here to make my brother jealous does no thing for me. He set his glass on a low table and flicked at imaginary lint on his suit. I caught sight of his emerald-tipped blade picking out from his jacket and resisted the sudden urge to use it on him. He plucked up his drink again and finished it off. Using someone is rude by any standards. If that was what he believed, all the better. I stepped into the light, watching as his focus dropped to the pale lavender tattoo on my forearm. He'd been amused by it the first time he saw it. Now I knew why. Much like when Wrath was displeased, the temperature around us seemed to plummet. I'd felt the frozen horror of envy's power and influence before, the ice-cold jealousy that eroded all sense of morality. The first licks of his power slid down my spine, but I'd been waiting. I lifted my hand as if brushing away a strand of hair and subtly ran my finger over Wrath's mark. It broke this prince's influence before it took hold, just as I hoped it would. Envy jerked back, his attention snapping to mine. A slow smile spread across his face, dousing the flicker of rage. Aren't you full of intrigue tonight? And here I worried dinner would be boring. I kept my expression bland, but my heart raced. If he tried to use his power again, I wasn't sure my little trick would work a second time. He seemed to sense that and was contemplating his next move. His lazy assessment reminded me of a cat that was deciding whether the bird fluttering close by was worth the effort of leaving a sunshine patch for. Envy's gaze flicked to his house dagger. He removed it from its sheath and ran a finger along the blade. There wasn't little doubt in my mind he was dreaming of creative ways to use it on me. My hand inched toward my own weapon, but I did not lift my skirts to reveal it. Whatever happened next, I'd be ready. We sat there for an uncomfortably long beat, the only sound the ticking of a clock somewhere in the room. Envy stroked the metal, and I swore the blade almost purred. Just when I was certain he was about to pounce, a knock sounded at the door, breaking the murderous tension between us. Envy replaced his dagger. At his command, servants filed in, carrying emerald trays and platters of food to the circular table near the far end of the room. The prince stood in one graceful movement and offered his arm. "Let us break bread tonight, not bones, Shadow Witch." I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring his outstretched arm. We were not friends, and I did not think he'd like for me to pretend in this instance. Everything about this evening felt like a test, which suited me fine. I had a test of my own. I made my way to the table and sat as a chair was pulled out for me. Envy did not appear insulted, only more amused as he took the seat across from me. I doubted many of his subjects ever attempted to irk him. Like wrath, any refusal to simper before his almighty power might intrigue him enough to entertain me, and my questions, until he tired of them. I must tread carefully along the line of challenging him without going too far over it. In vino veritas. He waved the servants away and filled our goblets on his own. In wine there's truth. Mortals occasionally impress, though I suppose they're especially susceptible when it comes to their vices. Give man wine and he'll wax poetic of its flavors. He'll probably even liken it to a woman he bed. His gaze slid to mine, or wishes to. "I could force you to tell me what I want you know." His voice was light, casual. Threats rolled off his tongue with the same ease one remarked on the weather. I ran my fingers across the mark again, drawing his attention to my neck. "Through violence, my lady. Alex isn't the only fanged member of my house. Lose enough blood, and I find that the effects are rather similar to truth wine, with less detriment to me naturally." Of course, he'd resort to gifting me to his vampires. I thought again about my twin. Victoria must have made some difficult bargains, too. I pushed back from the table, and someone rushed over to pull out my chair. It would take some time getting used to being doted on as if I were a pampered royal. I walked to Envy's side and took his goblet. I whispered a truth spell over it, then repeated the process with the spare bottles and my glass. Envy's grin was positively disturbing as I retook my seat. He lifted his glass. "Cheers to a night of truth amongst enemies. May our hearts only bleed at the loss of our dignity, and not because of a dagger in our backs." He downed his entire glass in one go. I raised my brows. "Is that necessary?" "Not at all." He refilled his goblet and took another large gulp. "But it doesn't hurt." I took a tentative sip of the wine. It didn't taste different. If I hadn't uttered the spell over it myself, I'd never know there was anything suspect about it. I frowned into my drink. Envy's sudden bark of laughter broke me from my thoughts. "The witches who raised you kept many secrets, I see. It's utterly delightful." "What is?" "Watching as your perfect world crumbles." "You're an awful person." "My dear, you keep forgetting. I've never been afflicted with humanity." He lifted his shoulder and drank more. "Besides, I meant it in a good way. A phoenix rises from the ashes for a reason. Your world must be destroyed for you to rise anew. And rise you shall, just as they always feared you would." "How long before the truth spell works?" He finished off his glass and promptly poured another. "It's already active." "Do you like me?" "I find you tolerable. Should you meet a violent ending, I wouldn't shed a tear, nor would I rejoice. I would go on as if you never were." I snorted in the most unladylike manner and took another sip of my drink. The night my Nona attacked you, you seemed to know her. How?" "Curses are curious things." He downed another glass and splashed more into his empty cup. "Sometimes they're like trees. They stay rooted to the spot they're planted. Other times they're like wildflowers. Their seeds float along with the bees and fly with the birds. They tangle and grow and thrive outside of that original patch they were sprinkled upon. Kind of like keys. Not all keys fit in locks. Some keys are much more cunning." I waited for his nonsensical ramblings to revert to a coherent answer. He simply gazed back at me. "That's not even remotely close to what I asked. Are you drunk?" "Quite." His smile was the first real one he'd given me. A dimple appeared in his right cheek. It softened the harshness he wore like armor. But what I said is true. There are things I cannot say, no matter the spell used on our wine, because there are greater powers involved still. I know your grandmother, though I know many other interesting secrets. I wanted to know how he knew Nona, but there was little use trying to pry information he clearly either couldn't or wouldn't give. Tell me about the curse, then. It's a tale so old its origins are known only to a few, and even their memories have become copper-like with the age and patina that's formed over them, dulling their shine until the shadow of what was is all that remains. What are you talking about? The story of curses and the stolen memories, and the unraveling of many lies. He abruptly leaned back, nearly tipping his chair over. My brother will never force you to marry him. It goes against all that he stands for. I didn't ask about your brother. No, but I imagine you're curious. Has he indicated his wishes for you to complete the bond? I didn't want to answer, but the truth spell enticed the words from my lips. He's told me about it, but he hasn't indicated which he prefers. I won't ask if you considered it, especially since we know the manner in which it's accepted, at least in part. I tried to not show relief, but envy must have seen the slight flash of it on my face. His smile was cruel delight. He may not force you to wed, but he will not meekly wait in the background. That is not his way neither. He will make his presence and intentions known to each royal house, as he did today. I took another sip of the truth wine. Why do you do that? Pardon? You always sow seeds of distrust between your brother and me. I do not need to drink my wine to ask my next question. Are you that envious of him, or do you simply covet anything that isn't yours? I am not always plagued by envious thoughts. His green eyes flared with an emotion that wasn't based in sneering or his namesake. My brother's temper caused something important to be taken from me. I clamped my teeth together and gripped my glass. It was no use. The words bubbled up. I clutched onto the phrasing envy used and allowed the truth to pour from my lips. No, I am not in love with him, but I do not deny there's an attraction. He brought me to this realm, sold my soul to his brother, and lied about being my potential husband. The lady doth protest too much. Shakespeare. I all but rolled my eyes. How pompous and unsurprising that you'd quote him. Should I be envious over your education now? He watched me over the rim of his glass, his gaze sharp. Odd, isn't it, that a peasant from Sicily would have such refined taste in books, or reading anything at all for that matter? I prickled at his insinuation. We may not have had money and servants, your highness, but we know how to read and write. I assume you'll tell me your proficiency is because of the spells your grandmother taught you, or the recipes from your little food shack, or some other such drivel. What are you getting at? It's simply curious is all, and do you know how much I enjoy curiosities? I grinned. It was the perfect segue into my next line of questioning. Why are you so interested in collecting objects? I'm mostly interested in divine objects. Well, that's not entirely true. He laughed as if he couldn't believe the truth was still pouring so freely from him. I'm only interested in one fully divine object now, the triple moon mirror. Why is that? What is that? He snapped his fingers and a servant appeared. He whispered something too low for me to hear, and the attendant dashed away. A moment later he returned holding an etched glass case. It was plain, unassuming. I immediately leaned across the table, hoping for a better view. It's a mirror of the gods, goddesses, I should say. He ran his pointer finger along the glass case, then rubbed it against his thumb as if checking for dust. It is said it has been embedded with the maiden, mother, and crone's magic, and can show you the past, present, and future upon request. It used to reside in this case, or so I've been told.